Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Waltye Rasulala, and I am board president of the North Carolina Chamber Music Institute. And this is our very first Impact webinar, and we are delighted that you have joined us for this evening. We will have a general discussion with our guests, after which there will be time for questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat at any time, and we will get to them in order. Now, the Impact series was launched 6 years ago. From the beginning, our goal has been to highlight diversity and inclusion, shining a spotlight on outstanding contemporary and unfairly neglected composers. We aim to increase access to classical music with free concerts. And we have commissioned composers to write a new piece for us every year. Our next commissioned composer is James Dargan. His new piece will be giving its world premiere at our upcoming Impact concert. I am joined today by that composer, James Dargan, as well as concert curators Elizabeth Beelman and Dr. Timothy Holley. Together, they have designed an exciting year of programs and extras, all free and open to the general public. Welcome, James, Liz, and Tim. Now, Liz is not only the founding executive director of NCCMI, but she's also the associate principal cellist of the North Carolina Symphony and a recent Raleigh Medal of Arts winner. Liz, can you tell us a little bit more about the Impact series?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. So the Impact series has been around for a number of years. I think we launched 6 years ago. And as Waltye mentioned, our goal has always been to highlight diversity and inclusion. We aim to increase access to classical music with free concerts. And because we're primarily an educational organization, it's really important to us to model positive change for our students. Our series is different in that it features emerging young artists alongside North Carolina Symphony players and guest artists from the community at 2 out of the 3 concerts. This gives our students, faculty, and the guest artists a chance to mix and mingle, creating a really wonderful atmosphere for creativity and inspiration, and also just building over time those relationships that help us all to feel supported in our journey, our artistic journey. So we thought we would share with you a slide showing some of the wonderful compositions that we've commissioned over the years. And starting with, we have Chrissy Ricker, who's from Cary. She wrote the Intergalactic Suite starting in 2017. That is a multi-movement work, and she wrote that piece that kind of tells about a journey of people into outer space. Peter Askham, who's from NC State University, wrote The Raw Heart of the Spinning World for string quartet. Quentin Blosh, who is an NCCMI alumni musician, he played cello with NCCMI and is now based in California. He's writing film music now, and he composed a piece called Afloat in 2022 about the experience of feeling like you're kind of floating through the pandemic. And then he wrote a piece called Sandcastled King for string quartet. So Afloat was a piano trio and Sandcastle King was a quartet. And here we are now with James Dargan, and we're so excited that he is writing a piece for us, Honey Rock, Wood Valley, over the next few years. And so, you know, this, just to let you all know, and I know we have a lot of students here, normally when there is a commission done by a composer, you'll hear all, you'll have everything at once. All the movements are created in the same kind of time frame and performed all at once. Well, we're a smaller organization, and we really still want to be able to commission works from prominent composers like James Dargan. And so in order to make that work, we are kind of in a different model. I would call it an unfolding model, where we are receiving one movement a year from the composer. And so we are really, really happy about this piece that's going to be played on the upcoming concert. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about that later. But I really think I'm going to hand it back to Waltye to carry on from here.
Okay, thanks so much, Liz. Next, we're going to talk with our composer, James Dargan. Now, James is a musician and a writer from Durham originally, and he's based in New York City. He is an amazing singer who also works as a composer, a violinist, writer, and a teacher. A musician since he was a child, James has shared his voice and carefully curated programs all over the US and Europe. He is a specialist on spirituals and other Black music, and he relishes writing for Black singers. He is currently writing 2 operas and has just finished his first Mass. Career highlights include solo work with the Boston Pops and operatic work with Esperanza Spalding and Wayne Shorter. James is a founding member of the consortium Ring Shout, and you can follow him at jamestdargan.com. James, hello and welcome today for our event. And we are so excited to hear your new piece, and just wanted to invite you to share the story of how did it come to be. We understand that it is a string quartet, that it is a work of 2 violins, viola, and cello. And the piece is called, as Liz just recently mentioned and showed you on the screen, Honey Rock Wood Valley. Is that right?
Yeah, and thank you so much, Walty. Thank you so much, Liz. And this is CJ, who I don't think will let me go, so you'll just have to ignore him. But yeah, it's called Honey Rock Wood Valley, and I kind of wanted to keep, the reason behind the title a secret, but I don't think I can keep it for much longer. So, um, I grew up in Durham, of course. I went to Duke University String School, did stuff, did lessons at Winston-Salem School of the Arts, did chamber music workshops at UNC Chapel Hill as well. My mom has taught for all of my life pretty much at North Carolina Central University, where Dr. Holley teaches, and my father taught at St. Augustine's in Raleigh. So I grew up in all of the ways in the Triangle and in Durham specifically. But um, my mom homeschooled me, and she decided that the name of our homeschool would be Honey Rock Homeschool because of Sweet Honey in the Rock, which is a fabulous group of Black women and scholars and singers and musicians and composers. Um, and Wood Valley was the name of the kind of the neighborhood that I grew up in. Wood Valley Court was the street that my mom still lives on, the street that I grew up on. Um, and when I got asked to write this, and especially for string quartet, it put me in mind of my childhood of growing up because I grew up a little violinist, very annoying, I'm sure, very into all of the Bach and the Beethoven and the Brahms and the Mozart and Schubert, especially. I still remember the first time I played any Schubert, Death and the Maiden, the cello quintet. Um, when I got asked to write the string quartet for an organization in the Triangle that works with students, I thought this is the time to write about, to go back to the beginning, right? There's a collection of songs that I love by Antonin Dvorak called "Songs My Mother Taught Me," and that is really a great title for all of my time growing up as a musician in North Carolina because I was tagging along with my mom when she was teaching at NCCU. She was chauffeuring me around to lessons and, ensemble rehearsals and coachings and concerts. And, so the story of me growing up as a musician was really songs, a lot of songs my mother actually taught me, but also songs that my mother drove me to, you know, songs that she made possible for me to access, right? So once that was nailed down, that was kind of a no-brainer in terms of subject matter, and also the community that I was writing this piece for. I'll speak a little bit more to that in the a later segment of this talk. But once I had that kind of ballpark nailed down, that I wanted to write something that made me think of growing up in North Carolina, growing up playing quartets, playing all kinds of chamber music, playing in orchestras, doing solo stuff, then it became an easier job to then again kind of narrow the lens, right? Because if we're looking at how you grow up, especially if you're a classical musician, you're like the seminal times of your childhood, um, going out on your first date, maybe your first kiss, maybe your first going to your first dance. Those are also going to be coupled with pieces of classical music, right? Like whatever you're playing at the time, right? I still remember, uh, you know, I associate going to school dances, and yes, I was homeschooled, but I was also asked to school dances, so I would go, to other people's school dances. And I still remember going to my first kind of school dance, and that night before we left my best friend's house was his school prom. Somebody asked me to as well. And before we left his house, we got around the piano and played the slow movement of Bach's double concerto with his dad, who was a pianist. And it was such a beautiful piece. And I think it was like we were just sight reading through it. And then we went to this dance. So there are so many moments like that when I look back, especially on like ages 0 to 18. There are so many moments like that for me. And so I wanted to write something that was grounded in all of those quartets that I'd played when I was a kid. Um, Definitely not copying off of, but obviously indebted to the tradition, you know. Um, Having a feel for it in my fingers is a big
Mhm.
deal for me because, up until now, I've mostly written for singers. I am a singer, so that's not a leap to make, but I've been wanting to write for strings for so long because that is the feeling of growing up for me. Learning the solo Bach stuff, playing my first Beethoven sonatas with my violin teacher's husband, who was also a pianist, right? I still remember the feeling of playing, the Spring Sonata for the first time, or trying the Kreutzer for the first time. And so I wanted to write something that would give students a chance to feel some of that nostalgia that I still have for playing quartets and playing with people, but also something that sounds, I don't know if more hip is the right word, but as you grow up, you realize that the music that you loved when you were a kid is now old people's music, right? And that's fine. But I also love some of the young kids' music, some of the new music too. And I wanted to write a quartet that had nods to the music that I grew up playing, but also to some of the new stuff that's been done, right? Like when I was growing up, Bartok and Schoenberg were like the more modern things that people did. Now,
Mhm.
we have Quentin Blash, we have, Caroline Shaw, we have Jesse Montgomery. It's 2024. We have new things, new forms, new sounds. So
Those
that's the
those are the thoughts that you're keeping in mind as you move from this introducing us to this
yeah,
piece,
yeah.
which will be the first part, and then when you get ready to you're still keeping those ideas going for the other movements in the
That's
piece.
exactly it. This movement is the most nostalgia based, right? Like this, and I told Liz this. I'm like, this is the easiest one, right? Because this is the least crazy one. Because I wanted the start of it to be like the first movement of this is like my start, right?
Right.
I got to start with Haydn and Mozart and Brahms and uh, a little bit of new stuff. Like there was a little bit of like T.J. Anderson and like some Taylor Perkinson and some of that, but mostly it was Florence Price, William Grant Still, really beautiful consonant mostly pieces, and I don't think I turned out too badly for it. I loved it. I
Yeah.
want that lushness, that ease of access. And as we know, all of the people on this call know, a lot of those pieces sound simple, but they very much aren't.
No.
right?
No.
There's a simplicity that kind of hides all of the stuff going on underneath, which is why I've written some of the parts for the cello and the viola that they are in this. Hope y'all are having a good time with that.
Well, we're going to look forward to hearing it. But right
Yeah.
now, I'd like to bring in Dr. Timothy Holley, who's also on our conversation this evening, and we're going to hear some more from you, James, a little bit later. And Tim is currently the interim uh, department chair of music at North Carolina Central, where he's a longtime associate professor of music. He's also has a solo playing career. He's also a member of the NCCMI Board of Trustees and a chamber music coach. In addition, he's a renowned scholar on the music of Black composers. So, Tim, for the past 6 years, you have curated our January Impact concert that takes place on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. That concert is called Chamber Treasures, Music by Black Composers. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the art of chamber music, and how do you see NCCMI reflecting these goals?
Wow. First of all, good evening. Thank you all for joining Waltye and Liz and James and myself. Thank you for such a loaded question. My doctoral dissertation at the University of Michigan focused on a repertoire of music written for the cello that only cellists knew, and sometimes even cellists didn't know about these works. And so one of the things that I quickly realized is that some composers and some works are known by cellists for one simple reason. Their teachers performed and taught, and in some cases maybe toured or recorded these works. But apart from the tradition of commercial publishing, unless a work is commercially published and carried by a well-known or respected or very commercially viable publisher, the work or the composer may only have a limited degree of access to an audience. So in my years with NCCMI, I have certainly worked to try to remedy that particular situation, at least with regard to matters of programming and diversity and inclusion. I think that the January Impact concert, our very first Impact concert in January was January of 2020. So this series will always have a special asterisk by it, because our very first concert was barely 6 weeks before the COVID-19 pandemic began. And our second Impact concert was actually just the streamed recording of the very first concert. So I'll always feel like I'm a year behind thanks to the pandemic. But really just the need to begin to carefully and politely educate our students, colleagues, and our audiences about the chamber music of African American composers and their need to be heard and their need to be played and given more exposure. Fortunately, has been a challenge and an aim that I've been very fortunate to address and to have had a very favorable response to. So the degree of variety and I guess imagination, if I dare use that word in quotes, is such that there's fortunately no standard one-size-fits-all way to program that kind of concert. And our faculty string quartet has been playing the music of Chevalier de Saint George, Florence Price, William Grant Still, all of the names that we have been introduced to usually during the month of February, but there are also a host of other names that unfortunately the month of February isn't long enough to include all of the names, but yet I'm getting started on mentioning those names and having their music performed um, in celebration of the King holiday. So um,
Well, certainly you have over the 6 years that we've done that one in January, introduced an audience to new music, and as well as the students of NCCMI, because they have the opportunity of following up on several of these composers and are continually learning about these composers. And let's face it, February shouldn't be the only month that these composers are heard. We've got a whole year, we've got 12 months that those composers should be heard, and many of them are. And your introduction has made it, really worthwhile for an audience of people to be able to hear it. So
thank you. It helps to have a 10-day head start on February for the King holiday. And
you're
I
right.
often I even tell my students that really beginning with the King holiday through February and even into March being Women's History Month, I just mark off the entire first quarter of the year
Right.
as a time to celebrate our diversity.
Yeah, which is wonderful. James, as a composer yourself, and you've spoken about how you envisioned and how you heard and felt your composition, your new composition that you're working on. But how do you see composing as both a personal expression, and I think you've given us a little bit of an idea of that, but also as an opportunity for community impact?
I'm gonna do, and again, you have great questions. I'm grateful for you because you do the work for us. It's not hard to respond to questions like these. But I'm gonna take the bipartite structure of the
Mhm.
question and actually make it a little sandwich. I'm gonna take the last part first,
Okay, great.
and seize the opportunity to lightly embarrass Dr. Holley while doing so. Two birds with one stone.
Oh,
Because
really?
because it's not only an opportunity for community impact, it is actually an expression of community impact, right? Because one of the places I got my start was at a camp called Raspberry Ridge. And one of my teachers in that camp was Dr. Holley, right? So I would not be here if he had not been the community that impacted on me, right? So that kind of leads me into dealing with the first part, because this is something I've grappled with for a while, growing up in music and growing up surrounded by music. And then so-called moving into a composer space where all of my life I've been surrounded by, especially my father, but other incredible musicians. I've always been improvising, right? Whether it was variations and diminutions on something in an early music style, whether it was growing up singing in the children's choir at church. Um, the idea that the notes on the page were the start and the end was never the idea to me growing up, right? So, um, I knew that there were different ways stylistically that were accepted to kind of flesh out what was on the page. But the way that I grew up was so firmly community music based that the idea that the composer writes something on their own and then bequeaths it to the performer was an alien concept to me, right? So that when a composer writes, yes, it is an expression of our personal feelings, but our personal feelings are subject to so many outside things.
Right.
Our ear for how you express those feelings through music is subject to our upbringing, to our surroundings, right? So the idea of a composer, we're fed this idea that a composer is kind of a solitary, connecting to the muse and just kind of, I hear it like this and then it's on the page. And yes, there is plenty of that. There's plenty of that solitary work, but you are formed. You are kind of marinated in all of these other things, right? So even if something I write doesn't sound like it at all, there's a connection to starting violin in Suzuki, right? where you're playing sometimes pretty complicated pieces with 20 other people at the same time,
Mhm.
right? So there's this idea that idea linked very easily to my growing up in church singing, right? Because you can be singing the same hymn with 40, 50, 100 other people, but
Yeah.
everybody's going to be putting their own spin on it. So when I look at composing, I look at it as, yes, one person, maybe a couple of people are collaborating in the case of an opera, right, with text, but I'm being fed by not only my background, but also who I'm writing for, which is where we come back, we kind of double back around to the opportunity for community impact, right? I do not believe in writing a piece without knowing as much as I can about the people who are playing it or singing it, right? So the mass that I just actually it premiered in March and it went really well. Really, I'm really happy about it. I know each of the singers very well. I know all of the instrumentalists extremely well. And those I didn't already know, YouTube is out there. I can email them and ask them for recordings. I don't believe in just writing a thing and being like, you there, you know, do your best, right? I think one of the things I've loved about the composing process over the centuries is composers working with performers, right? Because you hope the composer is a performer. When they're not, it's often trouble down the line. But even if you're a performer, you're not this particular performer, right? So I, as a baritone or a violinist, have to talk to a baritone or a violinist if I'm writing for them. I have to know something about their uh, way of engaging with their instrument. So when I knew that it would be done ultimately by students, but premiered by their teachers, that already tells me something, right?
Mhm.
That tells me that these students, before they even play the piece, will have heard their teachers playing of other things, have heard their teachers talking about other things. And so they have already an idea in their mind of what this piece will sound like if their teachers are playing it. So
Okay.
that gives me something already, something to build on, right? It's both parts of the question are influencing the process of composing at the same time, right? So that's kind of how I think of it. Even this conversation with y'all
Yeah.
helps me when I'm thinking of movements 2, 3, or 4, right?
And it
So,
makes good, it makes good sense. You're taking in the whole environment around your being
yeah.
and what you're thinking and what you see and what you feel
Hmm.
into the concept of the composition that you're working on it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, James.
Yeah.
Now, let's get back to Tim.
Mhm.
And Tim, can you give us a sneak preview of the Chambers Treasures concert in January? And James,
I can give
uh,
you a sneak, a sort of a sneak
yeah,
preview.
and bring
Was
James in on this too, because James is going to be part of that concert too. So we want to know what
right.
his gift to us will be on that concert.
Yes, well, but before I get to the sneak preview, I have to reciprocate the fond memory and the kind compliment that James has paid, not just me, but an entire community of musicians that we were so blessed to meet and learn and work with over the years. Not long after I moved and brought my family with me from Michigan to Durham, North Carolina, I had the chance to meet a gentleman named Chip Stam, who was one of the founding members of the Raspberry Ridge String Camp. And uh, we spent quite a while, both during the years and for about 2 weeks in usually in June, at a wonderful farm that Chip's mother, Jane Stam, owned, and her grandson, Martin Stam, now lives there. But I really learned how to be a good chamber music coach, being at Raspberry Ridge summer after summer. And James was a part of that gang. And James, I gotta lay this on you. Do you realize that you are older than Interstate 540? you
Oh
know.
my God. I do feel grown now. Thank you.
You're right. But
Yeah,
needless
okay.
to say, we had a great time. Lots of amazing musical memories. And then, of course, he also mentioned the Duke University String School, which I had a chance to also coach
Yeah,
as a part of for a few years. I can't remember exactly how many. I think it was about 5 years.
yeah,
But
yeah.
um, my involvement of James on the January concert is, number one, it's still coming into shape.
Yeah.
We're talking about doing a number of arrangements for voice, piano, and strings
Mhm.
that I think should come together pretty easily once we can, get all of the scores together and decide exactly, what he is most preferable for.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also a work for violin and cello by a composer by the name of Regina Harris Baiocchi. She's a native of Chicago and a good friend of mine for the past few years. And she actually wrote a four-movement work that's for piano trio, but each movement of this work is for a different instrumentation. And it just so happens that one of the movements is a violin cello duo. It's a series of variations on an Afro-Puerto Rican folk song.
Mhm.
So those two works are certainly the Baaki work and the arrangements that James is putting together. Those are going to be the part of the program that features him, but also works of Ulysses K and a composer and violinist who left us way too soon. A gentleman by the name of Timothy Baker
Mhm.
wrote a lovely elegy for strings, and he wrote it as a tribute to one of his string teachers who predeceased him. So we're definitely going to do those pieces. I know that my colleague Olga Kleankina usually has some wonderful piano students that, at least in previous years, we've been fortunate to feature. So while there's not an inexhaustible amount of programming room for the evening. I've tried to spread the love, if you will, on the program around so that it's not all string music, it's not all instrumental, vocal and certainly piano. And of course, we always close the concert with a playing and singing of James Weldon Johnson and John Rosamond Johnson's Lift Every Voice and Sing. So my goal is to try not to over program, but also to hopefully leave the audience wanting to hear more by the time we're done.
And they always do. They always do. Thanks so much for that teaser on that program. James, now, from what Timothy has said, you will be singing as well as playing.
Just singing and
Yes, sir.
arranging.
Uh-huh.
The songs that I'm gonna do with uh, strings and piano. Uh,
Great.
One of them is actually the song that I took a fragment from, a song of mine. Not, I'm only stealing from myself this time. Um, one
Okay.
of the songs that I'm going to be doing with them on the program and
Mhm.
making a new arrangement of, because it's originally just for voice and piano, but it was pretty easy to put a good cello part in there. So I think Dr. Holley will have a good time. But um, that song, uh, some of the cells, the melodic cells, are what I use to construct kind of the main theme of the movement of the quartet that's next
Great.
week.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
there's a little thread of connection going through, and the song itself is to a text by Langston Hughes, which is one of the
Wonderful.
first poems that my mom made me memorize when I
Right.
was in school. So it all comes around.
Oh, good. So we'll wait until January
Yeah,
with
yeah.
great anticipation for that program. But right now, I want to come back to Liz and let her give us a bit of a teaser on the upcoming concert that's coming up fairly soon, that your work is going to be premiered. So Liz, can you give us an idea of what that program is going to be like?
Absolutely. The upcoming concert is called Mendelssohn and More. And we've had either a Mendelssohn and More or a Beethoven and Beyond concert that's been our opening Impact concert the last few years. The idea being that we would perform something very traditional, a mainstay of the chamber music repertoire, and also music that was either commissioned by NCCMI and or other pieces that we felt that deserve being heard, that perhaps might have been overlooked in the past. There's so much great music out there, and it's really wonderful to have that opportunity to play this music. So just for an example, sometimes we did pieces by composers, that especially women composers, and one year we did a piece by Seitz, who's not a woman composer, but a lot of violinists would know the name Seitz, and he wrote some music for two violins, cello, and piano, which is an unusual instrumentation, but one that NCCMI groups are composed of very often, because we're sometimes shy of viola players, right? So there aren't any recordings of those particular pieces that Seitz wrote, which are delightful pieces. So we performed them and recorded them so the students would be able to hear professional quality samples of those things. So this one is called Mendelssohn and More, and as this year's thank you, James, for that. So this year, in addition to that basic theme, I was also really struck by the idea of voices, and what does it mean to have voice or to express your voice. And if you're thinking about instrumentation, obviously you've got different instruments, and every instrument has its own voice. And then composers have the voice, and performers have voice. And I like the intersections. I like thinking about the intersections between those things. So, of course, we are going to be premiering James's new piece for us. That's going to be front and center at the top of the program. And you've heard a lot about that. And we're so excited. My quartet is going to be performing that piece. And we call ourselves Aurora Musicalis, which basically means musical lights. And this group has been around for decades. It started out as a group with clarinet. My husband is a clarinetist, Jimmy Gilmore, who was principal clarinetist of the symphony, and he still plays with us a lot. But this is our quartet component of that same that same ensemble. And the musicians in the group are Emily Glover, Aaron Zaingut, Amy Mason, and myself. We're all members of the North Carolina Symphony. We've played together a lot over the last few years, in particular as we've been really delving into the string quartet repertoire. Following the quartet, James's quartet, we are going to feature my stand partner in the North Carolina Symphony, our principal cellist, Bonnie Thron. She's an amazing cellist. I've sat next to her now, I don't know, 14 years, 15, I don't know how long it's been. We have a good time. But anyway, she is also a teacher for NCCMI, and she's going to play a solo cello work. So you're going to hear a single voice, which is the voice of the cello in that piece. And the name of the composition she's going to play is called Hum. And it's written by Derek Skye. And I thought I'd share what the composer wrote about that piece. He said, "This is a piece that imitates the human voice. It is a personal meditation meant to sound as if one is improvising a song in an intimate moment." All right, so that's going to be Hum, the second piece. And then going from the introspective voice of a solo cello, we're going to move on to the famous octet by Felix Mendelssohn. And of course, that is a beloved piece, fantastic piece. He wrote it when he was young. He was just a teenager. Another reason why it might be an especially wonderful piece to sort of highlight for NCCMI. We'll have a lot of our students there at that concert. And it's really a work of genius. I don't know how he could write such a thing at I think he was 15 or 16 years old. It's remarkable. But, speaking of voices, what I love about that piece is how he incorporates every conceivable combination of those 8 voices. You'll sometimes hear pairs, you'll hear 3 players, you'll hear a solo accompanied by 4, you'll hear riffs of accompaniments that are going along, and then those are traded across the ensemble. It's a really exciting piece and really, has that youthful energy to it. So just to let everybody know, that concert will last about 70 minutes, I think, 75 minutes. And there will be an opportunity to meet our composer in person since he's going to be there. You'll be able to meet him and the performers afterwards. And the concert takes place on November 10th, which is a week from today, at 4 p.m. in the afternoon at Church of the Nativity in North Raleigh. I think Ben is going to put the address in the chat there. So if you need to drag that or somehow save that, you can, but you'll be able to find that information also on our website. The concert is free and open to the general public. We usually get a good crowd for these concerts, so be sure to come early. There's no reserved seating. You can sit wherever you want. So we do appreciate donations if you are so moved to help support these concerts and also to support scholarships for NCCMI.
Thank you so much, Liz. And now, as promised, we want to hear some of the questions that may have come in. So, Liz, would you mind reviewing some of those questions for us?
Okay, let me check and see what we've got here. I don't have anything right now in there. So while I'm asking a couple of questions, students, I'm going to encourage you to think of a question. I want every NCCMI student to put a question in the chat, okay? And there are no dumb questions. There are no silly questions. But I wanted to ask a question of, in particular, James, about composing, since we do have young people here today. What advice do you have for young people who might be interested in, trying their hand at composition? I mean, is this something that they should just dig in and try? I mean, how much training do you have to become a composer? Or do you think because they're already instrumentalists and they have this music in their head that they might have ideas that they can already play with right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you have an idea, it is good enough to be saved, right? I don't think that you even have to necessarily write it down. We all have our phones. We all have voice memo capability on our phone. So many of the pieces that I've done that have turned out to be, 9 instruments and 3 voices, like this mass or something, that takes up a lot of score space, have started with voice memos of me humming themes or ideas to myself. Don't think that because you don't know exactly how to write everything down right away, that it's not worth saving the idea, coming back to it, maybe sharing it with somebody else. Because composing is literally just songwriting, right? And we have people of all ages doing that on YouTube, on TikTok, all over the place, all over the world, right? We call it composing because it's for specific types of instruments, it's in a specific genre or style. But if you can hum a melody to yourself, you can compose. Like, and actually, I would encourage, especially kids who are learning an instrument, you guys are in a very privileged position in a great way, because a lot of people don't get the chance to be surrounded by music ever, right? Some of y'all are around more music now than most people will be around in their entire lives. So soak it all in, and then also see if you can squeeze a little bit of it out of your own, you know? I think everybody should write. Everybody should at least try, because if you don't try, then how will you know if you like it, you know? Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Great. So it looks like Matthew has put a question in the chat. And he said, how do you recommend a young composer get started with writing for other musicians?
Yeah. First, you want to ask, and great questions. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Miles. First, you want to start by asking them what are hard no's. You're right. Like, because if you write something and they're either really not into it or they're scared to do it, it's not going to be a fun process, right? You want to kind of ease them in, right? And then once you're friends, you can then like really give them something annoying, right? So that's the first bit of advice. You want to start by establishing kind of your hard nose. You want to ease them in, and then once you have them hooked, then you write stuff that's super hard because they can't get away then, right? So just be aware. You need to start it off slow, right? Make friends with people who play instruments that are not yours. Also a really good idea. Not just for that, but also, you know, for this, right? Um, in terms of Miles is saying, is it okay if I read? If I read,
Sure.
great. So Miles is saying, do you generally have an order of compositions, such as, coming up with a title and then a melody, or having a melody come to you, or choosing the instrument and then the melody? This is where the difference between writing a piece for yourself, which you hope will land with somebody, and getting something commissioned, right? Because when you're just writing, when you're like, oh, I woke up with an idea in my head, of course you write down the melody, or you write down the lyrics if you're writing a vocal piece, and that's all your choice. But when you have someone commission you, then they're gonna order. They need to have the ability to at least order off the menu a little bit, right? If a clarinetist commissions you, you probably don't want to write a piece for like solo viola for them, right? Like that's just you have to work with people, right? Because composing is a community-based thing, right? We don't just write whatever we want to write all the time. Sometimes, but not all the time. That's a really good question. Thank you. Um, and then Joyu, is that right? Joyu Lee. Hi, thank you for joining us. Um, Impact. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, so really great question. Joyu asked, what is the core message that I would like to share with students and listeners for this first movement? Um, so the core message is one, composing is for everyone. I'm drawing off of my backstory. You can draw off of yours, right? But anything beyond that is that it is comfortable. It is possible to be comfortable in classical music, and by that I mean you don't have to feel like you have to write or play music that is difficult in a certain way or that is hard to access or understand. Classical music has been around this long because it is accessible, right? The musical language we use is different from other genres only in the instrumentation, in the context, right? All music as we know it is built on tension and release. We use those devices to communicate emotional states of being. So if you take Schubert, he'll do something like he'll start you in minor. So then when you go into major in that split second, you've experienced this feeling of ecstasy, of joy that he's communicating, right? If you take Bach, for instance, Bach will pile a lot of voices up and then drop them all out and give you just a bass line for that feeling of just floating in air, right? One of my favorite pieces for this is actually, what is it, the E flat major prelude for cello, where he does this with all technically single notes, but he turns the screw of the harmony higher and higher until by the time you end on kind of a long tone, it's magical, but it is tension and release, right? So that's really the core message. It is for everyone, and it is possible to be comfortable, to feel at ease in classical music, both writing it and playing it and listening to it as well. Um, I like them to feel welcome, you know? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's as much as I can do without them hearing it. So, you know, thank you for
Yeah,
that. Oh,
yeah, those are great questions and
really good.
great response.
We do
Uh,
have one more.
Yeah.
One
okay.
more question. Natalia asked, how much time do you spend to compose an entire piece?
Well, thankfully, in my young career as a composer, I mean, I've been a performer for a lot longer, but I've been composing for like professional, right, for almost 10 years now. And I would say that I've been very lucky and that I haven't experienced any form of composer's writer's block yet. I'm so glad. Knock on whatever wood I can reach, right? But I think one reason I haven't experienced composer's writer block, whatever you want to call it, is that I don't censor myself before I write something down. I don't start critiquing it until I've got a lot of material down. So I do a lot of like, oh, what about this idea? Immediately sing it, write it down, play it, whatever, write it down, right? So I start with any piece that I write, no matter how long it is. I start it with, I don't know, 8 or 9 completely disparate little bits, right? And then you start saying, okay, well, this one obviously won't work, this one will work. And then you start developing it. But, you know, I'm very much a proponent of the famous kind of Beethoven method of just like scraps everywhere, right? So then when you're asked to write something, even if you don't have anything coming to you right away for this specific piece, you can go to your notebook and be like, oh, wait, this little bit or this little bit. If you get kind of unlucky and you don't have just a flow. For this particular piece, it didn't actually take me that long. It took me longer to do all the editing to be like, do I want this to be a dotted eighth note or a quarter note? You know, the minutia took a lot longer than the material. I would say the material took 3 weeks to come all together, and then I had to kind of shape it, right? So I think this is what like a 7 minute long movement, give or take.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So pretty much 3 weeks. I was very lucky with this. Once the instrumentation was solidified, I mean, I'm a quartet baby, so I would have been a little worried if I couldn't write one. I was like, I'm waiting. You know? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, James. Thanks
Thanks for the
thanks to
questions. Yeah.
you to Timothy and to Liz for all your wonderful insights this evening on your own compositions and on compositions of many other composers that we know that you'll be introducing us to as an audience over the next few concerts that will be coming up. And I want to tell you to please take advantage of the extras that we mentioned earlier. And you can see a whole list of the concerts and the extras and the audio insights and the conversations up right now on the upcoming events. So if you can check those out. And remember that NCCMI presents over 50 concerts per year, many of them by our student performers who are excellent,
Mm.
and most are free and open to the general public. Visit our website at nccmi.org/calendar for more details. We'd also like to thank our major funders for their support of NCCMI, and you see them all listed there too. And thanks to all of you for being here today. And we look forward to seeing you on November the 10th. It's right around the corner, and at all of our impact concerts. Have a good evening. Great evening.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Right.
Walty. Thank you all.
Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.